we played a game of Quiet Mouse. I failed.
You lost.
I lost.
Jonathan's the loser, everybody. He was too worked up from his daily brief this morning.
That's right. Welcome to Indie Talk this Thursday morning. It's 9 a.m. We have two guests with us, which we're excited about.
Yep.
So let's start with our virtual guest. Jake, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Jake Schmitz. I live in Fargo, and some would call me a kind of health freedom something or another activist, I guess you might want to call it. But yeah, that's me. I live in Fargo. I'm a chiropractor. As my original doctorate was in chiropractic, my second doctorate was in clinical nutrition.
Okay.
Family, 5 kids. Try
Very
to keep
cool.
it as boring as possible.
Fantastic.
Well, that's the way to win. We've heard locally. Stay boring, my friends.
It works.
Yeah. And when I say virtually, I guess in the world that we live in, we should clarify, he is a real person.
Yeah.
It's just, he's here.
Jake is not an AI, we promise.
So, also
AI would not create me.
we also are joined by Mike. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mike. I live here in Minot. I'm a retired special agent. I did 30 years with the Department of Defense, 22 of which I was a special agent working specifically counterintelligence, counterterrorism. Have a master's degree in international security studies and another in U.S. history. And on the outside of that, for fun, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I choke people for fun. So,
Yeah.
that's
So
me in a nutshell.
maybe a little bit less boring. But I guess one guy breaks backs, the other guy chokes people.
Mike breaks
Both
them, then
deadly.
Jake fixes them.
It's the perfect circle.
So there's a couple bills right now there's a lot of bills right now in the North Dakota legislature that's causing a little bit of a stir, but two specifically that we're going to focus on here. Maybe get to a third one. Let's start out with bill number 1450. And what this one is about is relating to parent and guardian access to the medical examination room of a minor. And this is a bill, Jake, I was scrolling through Facebook, and of course I've seen your stuff before, and there was a Facebook Live that you did about this and a post where you were pretty frustrated about the process that had been happening. And I went and I watched it. So your posts got me, and it was crazy what went on in this committee hearing. I don't care what side you agree with. There's like some things that just don't really care about what side of the aisle you're on. There was just something crazy that happened in this committee hearing.
Yeah, when something stinks, something stinks.
Yeah, there was a lot of passionate discussion, which is healthy, good, awesome. But then we never moved on. We just stayed in this discussion. So I want to hear, first off, if you break down kind of what this bill does, and even I understand why it's controversial, but also break down where the controversy is entering in. Jake.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting bill. On first blush, when you read it, it's a no-brainer. And especially living in a conservative state, we are very freedom and individual minded. Like it's a no-brainer. So what 1450 does is it says that you cannot intentionally require a parent to leave the examination room when they're examining your minor child, right? So at first blush, you're like, yeah, that just kind of seems like a no-brainer. You're not going to kick me out of the room when you want to examine it could be one of my daughters, it could be my son. Like, you can't make me leave, right? And so what ends up happening, and here's controversy number one. There's a second component to this, which I think it was nothing and it got blown out of proportion. But controversy number one was centered around, they tried to do it's kind of a red herring or a straw man logical fallacy where they're trying to make it this really big deal. And they're saying that if we can't separate the parent from the minor, we're not going to be able to establish, either abuse, right? So either sexual or physical abuse for a child. So they're saying we're not going to be able to establish that. Now, I'm a physician, first and foremost. I'm a primary care, even as a chiropractor, I'm a primary care physician. That's how I actually graduated. So whether we're talking medical, chiro, whatever, I'm a point of entry person. And so I'm required to turn somebody in if I see, signs or indications of abuse. What the law says is that I have to observe it and then I can report it. I have to report it.
Sure.
So the idea that, well, if I can't separate the parents to ask these really probing questions of this 3-year-old, which that came up. Sometimes we need to ask probing questions of 3-year-olds. And I'm like, excuse me?
Huh?
You need to ask my 3-year-old what now?
Yeah.
They barely know their colors. So what questions are you planning to ask? And so they're trying to make it like, oh, you're going to be, and we'll get into this, protecting child predators by passing this bill. And so that to me was the first thing. It was like, wait, time out. We're talking about a super small subset. And this was from Children's Advocacy Network, said that there's 345 cases that are sent into CPS every single year by physicians, medical providers. Well, really quickly, you can find the stats on this. Of those 345, about 93 of them are substantiated with evidence, meaning that over 70% of them, it was a nothing burger where the person really blew it out of proportion.
Sure.
Now,
Surprise.
I want you to contrast 93 cases, which I think that's important. We need to find those. I'm not saying that isn't important.
Completely so.
What I am saying, though, is there's roughly 400,000 visits to providers with minors. 400 in our state, 400,000 every single year to find 93. And my point is that you don't need mom and dad out of the room to figure out if this kid is, obviously sexual abuse is completely different, and you're not going to just see that. Right. So that's where it's like, that really was like I said, it was a distraction type argument. You're not seeing that. You'd have to ask probing questions, in which case that's more like psychiatrist or psychologist, not general practitioner. So that was the first thing. Second thing the bill does is it says that you have to, in advance of the appointment, give the parent a list of topics that you'd like to discuss so that we could at least have some kind of a clue when you all of a sudden start talking about reproductive health, let's just say with your 13-year-old or 12-year-old, you'd at least have an idea what's going to happen. And so they were like, there's no way we can, and they tried to say, there's no way we can know every single question. And this would say we have to have every question. And it's like, no, it says a list of topics.
Gotcha.
At most, you're going to see 5 total topics. You just all you got to say is, it might be one of these 5 we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. Super simple, not onerous. And the medical doctors that testified were trying to make this thing like, oh my gosh, we'll have to leave practice and we're going to quit, or we're not going to comply with the law. And it's just like, this isn't complicated. It's not hard. So that was the controversy around the bill. And the people in favor of it are basically saying, due to what happened during COVID, whether you agree with the COVID stuff or it doesn't matter. What happened during COVID, and there are studies on this, what they found was if the medical doctors are able to separate a parent from their teenage child, they're more likely to talk that child into a vaccine or some kind of a medical intervention. Okay. So like, what's the real danger here? It's not mom and dad sitting here just, being present for the exam. It's right. If we can get them away, then it doesn't matter if mom and dad are vaccine hesitant. We can convince the child to do it because, obviously they're 13 and they're very impressionable especially when you're a medical doctor. So That's the backstory.
Right. Very interesting backstory.
That's a great breakdown of the whole situation coming up to now.
And so in this committee hearing, there's this amendment that comes forth, and it was proposed by 2 of the members of the committee. There was a motion that was made. There was a second to the motion. It was now on the floor, as is said. It is now on the table to be discussed. And then what happened was very intense discussion, not direct, but very close to being direct. Accusations being made of, if you do this, you are going to be helping traffickers. You're going to be helping enable these type of people, child abusers, things like that. Very intense, targeted discussion. And then there was a break. So all of a sudden there's like this filibustering that begins to go on. And have you seen that before in these committee hearings at all to this point?
Not that. I've seen things get close to violating Robert's rules. I've seen stuff get right up to the line, but nothing that I would say is like a blatant disregard of Robert's rules. Right. This was the most blatant that I have ever seen. And I'm a kind of a nerd. I enjoy watching committee work. I like listening to what these people, because in committee work, they don't think people are watching. And that's when you get to see how these legislators really think. Yeah. And so you get to really dive into like, all right, what do you really think about these bills? And that's when you find out, is this person even conservative? And
right.
Spoiler alert, they're not.
Wow.
The North Dakota supermajority for you.
The third party. So it's a great point, because when it's on the agenda, so if 1450 is on the agenda, then every activist, every person, if you care about it, you're going to show up, you're going to be online, you're going to submit your testimony. And typically the people that are, whether it's on the House or the Senate side, they just sit and listen. It's very rare that they ask questions. It does happen. but it's not often, and it's normally opposition questions. But it's not often that there's a lot of questions that are asked in those deals. But in the committee work, like you said, it gets real because there's nobody to testify. They have to go and give their real opinion on what's going on. And there's not a strong timeline for it either. So you can sit and watch committee work for 3 hours, or maybe that's a little bit too long, but for a long period of time and not know what they're going to discuss, just that it potentially one of the bills that you care about are going to be discussed. Yep. So it's kind of a really vague area that's created, maybe necessary, but it's definitely vague and not very transparent, which is a different topic. But go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, what's interesting about that point, if you care about a bill, you have to be always, you have to watch it every single day.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is that, and I've been talking to people like, and I'll throw a name out there, but I had a conversation with Dustin Gavrilo about this, that, this happens all the time. Like, we're so flippant about this, where that they'll be in committee work and you may be passionate about a bill, me passionate about a bill, but I'm not in the executive branch. So I don't work upstairs. So then all of a sudden they're in committee work, they're without notice discussing 1450. And then magically there's 4 people for the state that are sitting there in the audience so this happened during the committee work we're talking about.
You're right.
Judy Lee called up 4 people to testify during committee work after the motion had been made.
Right. Which is another breaking of the rules of Robert. Good old Robert.
What's interesting though is during Robert's rules, I looked this up because I was pretty heated about it. You can, the chair can call people up to testify when you're in discussion phase. So that wasn't technically a violation. I want to be clear on that, because the things that were violations were absolute violations. This was one of those, you're like, really?
Just, it's a little ticky-tack kind of thing.
Yeah. Like, it was very clear, like, we're going to try to talk you out of this motion, which is what ended up happening.
I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. My bad. It's a bad habit that I've been trying to break for like the past, ever since I started the podcast. But anyways,
I'm used to it.
The point, if you're bringing up someone that's an expert, typically they'll try to bring an expert, and we see this at a local area with city council. For people that ever watch stuff that we do on that, like Dave Lakefield, he's the man. They're always bringing him up as the expert on finance and things like that, to be like, what's going to actually happen if we pass this? How is this going to affect? And that's it. But the way that they were bringing them up was expert, but it was more testimony than it was like expert. It was because it's not the normal way that you normally do that. So it may have been legal, but it was
legal.
Crossing a line of ethics, probably.
It was very targeted how they kind of presented that whole situation.
So what you've tracked it, where does it go from here? Like what can we do? There's blatant rules. Is our best option to vote people out, or is there something that the people can still do if they care about this?
So the hard and fast of this, and here's the part that really is annoying, is that if you were, let's say, any of the executive branch, so like a state agency, you mentioned city council, like there's like some of these executive branch agencies, state boards, what have you, if they break the law, you just turn them in. It's a district court violation. You can basically, or the attorney general's office, you could do. But when it comes to the legislature, the only recourse you have, so if I really wanted to turn Judy Lee in for how she ran that committee meeting, or that hearing, or whatever you want to call it, this committee work, I would have to go to the most senior person, which is Senator Hogue, and I'd have to go tell him, and then he gets to decide if he wants to do something about it. So in reality, as far as that goes, there's, outside of making a big stink about it and telling people that live in her district, which is District 13 in West Fargo, that you need to vote for someone else, that you got to get somebody else in there, because she's like 83. Wow. Like, let's be honest, she's pretty entrenched in her viewpoint. Outside of that, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do. She ended up, do you want to talk about the committee, what happened? Because
let's go there next.
She ended up getting what she wanted in the end.
Right.
So let's talk about this real quick. So there was 2 senators, Senator Clemens and Senator Van Oosting, and this is the Senate Human Services Committee. And so they're doing committee work on this, where they're going to discuss this. And they're kind of, it starts off with Senator Lee going on a monologue about why we should trust our providers. And it's weird that nobody trusts them anymore, which not that weird. And then you get Kristen Roars, who has her opinion because she was a nurse at one point in her career and in HR. And so she was very vocal on nothing bad ever happens. And then the third amigo, I would say there's the 3 amigos in that. And it's Kristen Roars, Judy Lee, and then Hogan, Senator Hogan, who's a Democrat out of Fargo. those three vote in lockstep every single time. And Hogan is the leader of the Democrat Party in the Senate. And so those three vote together every single time in the Human Services Committee.
Again, that'd be weird.
These are things that tell us, this tells us stuff, right? So anyway, they were basically going around all the reasons why this bill sucks. And so Clemens basically says, yeah, cool, I motion do pass. I move do pass. And then it got immediately seconded by Van Oosting. And okay, so now there's a motion on the table.
Right.
The next thing you do, okay, there's a motion, further discussion. So you can have further discussion. That's legal. Right. So what ends up happening, the very next thing that happens, and the first person who speaks in this discussion is Senator Kristen Rohrs. And we kind of mentioned this briefly, but I've got her exact quotes right here. And I can't do it in her. She had these big crocodile tears, and of course I can see through the TV. So it was this like crackling voice, like, I can't. She's like, Madam Chair, I think what you're doing by passing this bill. And she was just super, super emotional, but not really. But she said, I think what you're doing by passing this bill as written, you are protecting people who abuse children. And she's looking straight across the table to the two that made the motion.
Right.
And then you can see, Judy Lee is like, preach. Rohrs goes, and that makes me so angry right now. And Lee's like, Rohrs goes, you are allowing people who could possibly human trafficking these children and parents who are abusing their children to have the ability to never allow their child to speak up. And I just can't believe we would do that.
Right.
Okay, well, that's pretty aggressive language.
It was.
And so it kind of goes from there. It goes Hogan. Oh, no, actually, Judy Lee talked for 2.5 minutes after that. Then Hogan talked. And then Clemens goes, good on him. He stood up for himself and is like, we do this a lot in this committee where, some people in this committee, if you don't agree with the person talking, like you're kind of said, you're antagonistic and you just don't believe them. You don't give credence to what they say. Yeah. And he goes, and it's not fair for you to say that. Like the people that passed this or created this bill, they're trying to protect parent rights. And so he's kind of like called her out. And then Van Oosting was in tears. I mean, she was in tears because you're basically being told that you're a human. You're essentially aiding and abetting human traffickers. Like how abhorrent. So they dinked around long enough. Nothing actually happens. Clemens at one point says, I want to take action on my motion. Basically, he goes, I want to take action. That was the word he used. Now, I've since spoken to him and I said, what you need to say is call the question. That's a Robert's Rules thing that moves that you say, basically, we're done. Let's vote. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Judy Lee goes, no, I think what we want to do now. And she called up 4 separate people to testify. And when she called them up, she specifically said, here's the issue with this bill from the perspective of child trafficking and sexual. And she said, I want you to talk about that. And basically all the reasons why Kristen's right and you guys are wrong.
Right. That's crazy.
And then at the end of it, they didn't vote. She goes, well, let's take a quick recess so I can potty break because I'm old. Yeah. And so they leave. Kyler. They come back 10 minutes later and she basically goes, okay, we're back in session and we're going to break for lunch. Peace out.
Yeah, that's
and they
crazy.
leave. They come back 2.5 or 3 hours later and she starts off with another. And go watch this, people. I can't.
Yeah.
Just like,
you should watch it.
Just go watch it. It's worse when you watch it.
It is.
She spent 2.5 minutes talking basically about why it was okay for what Kristen said. That sometimes we need to ask the tough questions because that's our job. And it's like she never asked a stinking question. She pointed and said, you guys are awful humans. And then after that, she said, well, I think it's important that we hear from the bill's sponsor. And she's not here, or that person's not here right now. So, but if you guys wanted to do that, you'd have to rescind your motion so that we could do that. And then she just sits back. And it's a 2-minute awkward silence where finally they go, fine. We'll Van Oosting decided she wanted to hear from the sponsor. And Clemens said, okay, well, I'll rescind my motion. She rescinded her second. We'll talk to the sponsor and then we'll come back. And then what ended up happening was now they've got an amendment floating around that kind of tweaks things. And they're going to talk on Monday, this coming Monday, which would be whatever that 6th.
Yeah, 6th or 7th
or whatever it is. They're going to talk about, this amendment and then try to figure out what to do with the bill. And I still think it'll end up 3-3 do not, or like a no decision from the committee. But that's a blatant Robert's Rules violation. If you cannot break for lunch, for recess, for anything until you take action or somebody makes a motion to table, you can make a motion and say, I moved we table this until after lunch. You can do that, but then you got to vote on it.
Yeah. Right.
But you cannot leave a motion on the table. That's like, as a chair of a committee, that's like rule number one, if there's a motion on the table, you have to act on it.
Right.
So
yeah.
like, that's
crazy.
frustrating.
So even when they went to rescind it, I believe it was Roars even gave them a little bit of grief for that as well, saying like that's not something that normally do. Typically, once you submit your bill, you just kind of let it go and you just hope it works out, and you might influence it from the background a little bit, but for the most part, it's just you submit it and let go. And so even that part, they were trying to give him grief over. But I want to ask Mike a question. You probably have a little bit of experience. We'll get you into the conversation here.
All right.
With this human trafficking deal, and I know this isn't really the focus of it, but this is a point that they're really trying to drive heavy, is medical, and Jake, obviously you have experience here too, but Mike, is medical facilities the place where most of the human trafficking is caught?
In my experience, it's not at all. And most of the time it's through investigative work outside of the medical facility. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha. So we're talking about a secondary, if you would, and it may even be
Tertiary
lower than that,
stage,
but a secondary place that human trafficking and some of this stuff is caught, and acting like this is the front lines, that physicians are on the front lines stopping human trafficking, and if we do this, we're going to be able to end the work that they're doing. That's crazy.
Although as medical providers are mandatory reporters no matter what they see, right?
Yes.
The majority of the work happens outside based on an allegation from a concerned neighbor, a witness, something like that. And then law enforcement gets involved and runs these investigations, and they take quite a long time.
Yeah.
In my experience, 22 years with a badge, very seldom is the emergency room the front line of where human trafficking is absolutely stopped. It's a couple years of investigation, and you'll see it in the news where there's a massive arrest of multiple people, and there's multiple rescues of people being human trafficked. That it's not in the exam room at the pediatrics office.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so that's just crazy.
Really good kind of wrap up of that whole situation to tie it all together there. So where does it go from here, Jake, with this bill?
Well, they're going to discuss it in committee on Monday, like I said. And I'm sure it's Monday morning. It'll probably be about 10 a.m. I think that's what they said. They're going to start their committee is 10 a.m. So after that, they'll make a motion. They got to either move do pass or do not pass recommendation, and then they'll vote on it. And I'd be willing to bet one of the three amigos is going to try to move a do not pass before the other ones move do pass. Like they're going to like one of the gals is going to try to like spearhead it and get in front of it, which that'll fail. And then my guess is it'll be a 3-3. And then the next person, Clemens, probably will make a motion do pass, which will fail. 3-3 is my guess. Mm-hmm. And then it's going to come out of committee without a recommendation. So when it goes to the floor, then it'll get the floor will have to debate on it, which will probably be heated debate on the floor. And then, they're going to say there was no committee recommendation. Now, here's the next thing that happened, and this has happened with multiple bills so far this session in human services, is that when it's like a 3-3 or a 4-2 or something that's close, one of the three amigos is always the carrier. So they make sure they get to carry it to the floor. So most people don't know this. So after committee makes their recommendation, one way or the other, then they have to have a bill carrier. So that person is who stands up in front of the floor to explain how did the committee come to its conclusion? And so what happens, and there was another bill that happened, it was a 3-3, and Judy Lee said, I'm taking this bill. And so she brought it to the floor and was very, I wouldn't say, she didn't throw all of her bias out, but a lot of it. And surprise, surprise, she got what she wanted. That bill died. And it was a very good bill. And so I'm guessing that same thing will happen. It'll be either Roars or Lee will take this one to the floor, and then they'll premise all of these people who showed up to say all of the good work will be ruined. And Children's Advocacy Network said that this is going to be Armageddon. Right. Like that's how they do it. And so then people are like, well, I don't want to go against human traffickers. Right. And so without knowing any information, they'll vote based upon what Judy Lee said. And depending on how many people stand up to testify for it, probably Van Oosting and Clemens will again, but that's pretty much what will happen. Then the floor decides, and what will happen is I think they're going to approve an amendment, and if it passes, then it gets still sent back over to the House for the House to concur.
I see.
So there's still some stuff with it, but that's kind of what's happening next.
Quickly, if we can go over a second bill, and that's 1318, I believe.
Which we've touched on a couple times in the past.
Yeah, and it's the pesticide bill.
Yeah.
And basically this one is also one that is taking some weird routes.
On the surface, it kind of comes off. They're trying to protect farmers with some labeling situations, and it has really, when you look at it, it really ends up protecting pesticide companies and manufacturers from any kind of potential litigation, so long as their product has the right form of labeling on it.
Right. And then we were talking before we jumped on, this has come in and out of hearing. It's just jumping back and forth. And lobbyists are spending a lot of money trying to get this through, flying in special witnesses. I say witnesses because we follow too many trials, but testimony, people flying in many experts and stuff like that. But basically what's going on with this one at this stage, Jake?
So a very interesting bill. It passed the House and it passed the House unanimous. And I've spoken to many of the House reps who are like, they told us this was just a simple labeling bill, right? And they were bamboozled. And because of it, the way that it went through, like my group, I didn't see it until it was already on the Senate side. I had no idea. And that's when there's 3,000 bills, it's hard to keep track of them all. So it crossed over and on the Senate. So their first hearing on it, I did written testimony. I didn't speak. But what ended up happening was in the testimonies or in the hearings is that the people who are in favor of it go first, then opposition, then sometimes neutral, depending on the chairman. Well, the in favor people got to speak for 66 minutes in that hearing. And I think Chairman Lewick in the Ag Committee thought this was going to be a simple bill. I don't think he realized what he was getting himself into with this. And so there was a lot of people that wanted to testify. He ran out of time. And so once the people that got into the opposition side, there was 3 of them that were testifying, and all 3 of them, he said, we got to hurry this up. So go give us the Cliff Notes version. So it was 66 to 18 as far as minutes go on that one. Wow. So then what happened? So we're pretty miffed about that, but it is what it is. That sometimes happens. Yeah. They go to committee work. And in committee work, now this the funny thing with the state law, it's the law. And so one of the things with the law is if you're going to have a hearing as a legislator in a legislative body for these committees, you have to note it. It has to be publicly noticed so people have an opportunity to show up and speak. So they had it down as committee work everywhere on the legislative website, committee work. They go to committee, and then Chairman Lewick says, "Okay, we're going to restart. We got a second hearing on this." Bangs his gavel, and they have a second hearing. Magically, nobody in opposition was there, and there was 6, I think, people that were in favor who were all there. So clearly, they all got the memo. It was going to be a hearing. Right. We didn't.
Sure.
So I emailed Chairman Lewick after that, and I said, "This is a blatant open meetings violation, 440419. I'm like, you need to make this right, because as it stands right now, you broke the law with how you held that meeting." Mm-hmm. And I never got a reply, which is fine. You don't have to reply. But then all of a sudden on the website, there's going to be a third hearing on it.
Okay.
Magically, there's another hearing. And so then I showed up and I testified online for that one. And you can watch it. I thought it was good.
Yeah.
And then after that, which was really annoying, is every single person in the Ag Committee for the most part, with the exception of one, they're farmers. So Senator Myrdal made the comment, and you can go look this up. She made the comment that I make money, and farming's about making money. Yes, we want to feed people, but it's about a profit, and these products help me make more of a profit. So of course I'm going to vote for this bill. I'm like, you said the quiet part out loud. Yeah, it's clearly a conflict. At minimum, an ethics violation. So anyway, they voted and they put through one of the amendments on it, and they said, "Cool, we're good." They voted. It was 5-1. The lone Democrat, Marcy Ellis, is like, no. He voted no. So then that should have been it. And we're like, okay, that sucks, but whatever. We lost. We kind of knew it was an uphill battle with everybody in the Ag Committee being Ag people.
Yeah.
And yeah, by the way, this bill was sponsored by Bayer. So I'm pretty much against that from the jump, because they clearly don't care about North Dakota. Anyway, so it was supposed to go to the floor, and then all of a sudden it's just not showing up on the floor, on the Senate floor. And I'm sitting going, what is happening? And so there's a lobbyist that's kind of on our side of the fence for this bill. He's been texting with me. He goes, they're sending it back to committee. So it's like right as we're doing this, they're in committee right now discussing this bill
for a 4th time.
And supposedly they're going to try to pass another amendment. And then I don't know, it's a gong show, but they realize there's senators that are like, what is happening with this bill? Why are they generally, they don't hear anything about a bill until it hits the floor or that week of.
Right.
But they're hearing it nonstop from constituents who are like, why are we granting pesticide companies immunity? That seems like a bad idea.
It's questionable to say.
So that's the
least.
Cliff Notes version.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see when it actually finally comes before the Senate, how the Senate decides to vote on it. I feel like it's going to end up being close. Hopefully it ends up going one way versus the other, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. It seems like it'd be really go ahead.
I was just going to say the good thing is because they're putting amendments on it, now it has an opportunity to go back to the House. And I've had multiple people on the House tell me that they want a second crack at this. And so they'll probably do a committee to discuss it. And hopefully we get some people in the committee from the House side that are willing to be like, this bill sucks, we should kill it.
Yeah.
You know, because if they can't agree, then the bill dies. So there's still opportunities. It's an uphill battle.
Yeah. It seems like there's some of the people in the House that have said, you know, I didn't fully understand what's going on, so I'd vote differently if I had the chance. So it is good that it will go back to the House. Well, I really want to say thank you for joining us today, Jake. It's been a good insight into these bills. We're going to go to a quick break, and then we'll be back to talk term limits and a couple other things with Mike.
Look forward to it. Thanks again, Jake. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was fun, guys.
In the demanding world of oil and gas, precision, safety, and efficiency are non-negotiable. Unmanned operator drone services revolutionizes how you monitor, inspect, and manage your operations. With cutting-edge technology and expert operators, we deliver real-time data, detailed reports, and actionable insights for our valuable clients. Why risk the safety of your team or waste precious time? Our drones access even the most challenging areas with ease, reducing downtime and enhancing safety across your sites. We take the guesswork out of your projects by offering LiDAR, mapping, and inspection services so that your projects stay safe, on budget, and on time. Unmanned operator drone services, where technology meets safety, precision, and efficiency. Contact us today to elevate your operations. Yes, pun intended.
We're back.
We're
back in. I took my headphones off. They were uncomfortable.
Well, that was an interesting conversation.
It was.
Interesting what goes on in the legislature in North Dakota.
How do you like talking about the state legislature, Mike? It's a blast, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super fun. No stress there at all.
No, not even a little bit. Do it every 2 years because we're North Dakota. We don't want to do it every year because we have the citizen legislature. So they put 1,000+ bills through the 3-month time frame they have, and here we go. We're getting through it.
Yeah, nothing will get missed there.
No, never, right? Never.
No, it's a lot of work, and so we have something that we want to do. Let's wait on that for a minute because let's get this conversation going about term limits. Simply this. I mean, this is a really interesting thing. Why it keeps coming up, and it shows the impact of it. And I like we have people commenting like, and it's something that is I don't disagree with. I struggle with this thought. Like we are saying we want, the way I present it is we want limited government, and then we say, okay, let's go ahead and do term limits and make the government a little bit bigger and limit the people rather than the government, right? Things like that. But the people voted a couple years ago for term limits. It got into place, and then this session, the legislators have been very active in trying to change what that means. After it was put into the Constitution.
Yep, established in the Constitution of the state of North Dakota.
They're trying to go and change the date that it becomes effective. So that means that people that were, most of them previously served, but they would only be able to serve 6 years under the term limits rather than a full 8 years. So they're trying to get it where the effective date would allow them to serve a second term under term limits. And I think the one that, and there's some that disagree with me, I think the one that is the most difficult is the ones that are appointed. You get appointed to finish out someone's term. You don't get to be elected. You only get to be elected once, though. That I think that is an area where I wish it would change for sure.
A little more clarification there.
But now that stuff, like I don't agree with it, but to me that's a little bit of semantics. Like it's going to get worked out, maybe whatever. I don't agree with it.
By a couple months or a year or something is one thing. However, the other one that's going through right now that just got passed, and it looks like now next fall in 2026, term limit adjustments will be back on the ballot because the state legislature decided that we didn't do a good enough job a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago now. And so it looks like they're going to be changing the term limits just the surface level from 8 years to 16 years.
Yeah, that to me, this is a massive change. This is not a deal for me. For me, it creates two conversations. One is, do we agree with term limits or not? Okay, and that's a conversation that has been hashed out, and that can continue to be hashed out. But this is the people voted on something, and now the legislature is saying, did you really want that, or do you want this? Mm-hmm. And that's part of their job, so I understand that, and I get where that side comes from. But to me, some of the comments that they're making in this one comment is basically, this is what the people voted for. It's just a little bit different, but we're still doing what the people wanted, is essentially one of the comments that was made. Mm-hmm. Another comment is that this is a difficult one in my opinion. Let me pull it up here. Those of us who live this life every day understand there are pros and cons to term limits in a way that people who have not lived it can't understand. And so that's what they're talking about being, So it sounds like you have some comments on this.
What it sounds like is a government official telling the people of North Dakota that they're not smart enough to understand what they're voting on, and that you have to rely solely on a government official to tell you what's right and what's wrong and what you should vote on. And that's clearly at odds with the American ideal of the democratic process.
By the people, for the people.
Yeah, absolutely right. You're elected to represent me in my district and what we told you to do, not what you think we should do. That your whole purpose, once you're elected, is to enact your district's wishes.
Yeah.
Right.
And when this is something that passes as a constitutional amendment handily, and to throw it back at the people, not just to, and again, I think the first part we were talking about some semantics of adjusting the dates to fill out terms a little bit more efficiently, that's one thing. But to go back and throw and change, hey, we're saying that the 8-year term limits you did were not good enough. You should think about it again and think about doubling that. Yeah. That's a whole different conversation.
I completely disagree with that. If the people said 8 years, if that was what they voted on, then it's 8 years. Mm-hmm. And I am a huge fan of term limits, both at the state and the federal level. So, because that historically is how a federal republic is supposed to run. You're supposed to go and you get elected, serve, do your term, and then go back to your previous job and let somebody else there.
Yep.
And what it smells like for this change is trying to entrench yourself back into the political system so you can stay there forever, even at the state level.
Right.
And I disagree with that.
It may be a cliche, but it is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that indirectly, at least, implies that it's not someone that turns themselves into the government. It is someone that comes to serve in the government and then leave.
And we've had that flip for so long that it's normalized now. That's the problem.
People that serve 50 years in the Senate, it becomes a thing.
Yeah.
And
it's so I'll get you. So let's see. Steve Vedder said the senators don't want to become representatives. That's really what this bill is, because that's all it does, which was an interesting quote. And I don't know where he stands on it. I don't know how he voted on it, but there's a pretty good quote. So then Representative Dan Ruby said there's a real problem when people either resign for one reason or another or pass away, like what happened, that whoever is that the replacement is really shorted on the amount of terms that they would be able to serve, which I fully agree with.
That's fair.
Yeah, that is a fair point.
It still keeps the 16-year cap that the voters express their desire to have. So I think it's all right, and it is up to the voters to change it. So he's saying that it's still he's saying that the voters voted in a 16-year cap rather than the 8-year on each side. And then a really good point, though, it is still up to the voters to change it. So this is not something that's going to
just happen regardless. It is going to be back on the ballot in the fall of 2026, and we will have the chance to vote on it once more.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Dr. Jake says that's because the senators think they're better, and sometimes there is a feeling of that. So that's an interesting one. Keep your eye on keep your eye on the ballots, and however you feel about it, make sure you get out and vote for that.
I think it's a a very good way for elected officials to test the boundaries of what the citizens of the state are willing to put up with.
Yeah.
And if you don't get out there and vote your belief on the next time, then you've told them what you're going to allow them to do.
Fine with that.
Yeah, you absolutely. You've agreed with elected officials that you're not smart enough the first time to make the decision.
Exactly. You're
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. And I think Scott Burlingham makes a good point as well, is that we have to remember is we're electing people there. So remember that. Also, we get mad at our representatives and we get mad at our senators and whatever the role is of the elected official. But remember, no, you went ahead and made the determination to put them on to vote for them when they were on the ballot.
Another reason open primaries are a good thing.
That's another discussion for a different day.
I've said it many times in conversations. You get what you voted for.
Yep.
So.
Yep, 100%.
It's truth. And with that, just once you voted them in, don't shut up then.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to say that. I tell my kids not to say that. But
stay vocal, stay engaged, stay active. Make sure your local reps know what you think. That is your right, and they are your representation in the state legislature.
Well, it's the most pure form of the political endeavor is the local and state level, where you have the most impact. And if you're not going to be vocal there, then there's going to be no change whatsoever.
Exactly.
Right? No, this is a really good point.
Yep.
People kind of overlook local, but actually there's a lot of power that comes from there. Marie Stewart says a really interesting point. Why can't the senators start an initiated measure and gather signatures to undo? Do the same process that the people did rather than go and just vote on it.
Yeah,
that's
a fantastic point.
That is
be something that would be great to see them even trying to do. Like, hey, we think that this is wrong, but we're going to go and grab the citizens' actual support and get their signatures to do this and put it on the ballot.
Yeah.
Rather than, us just say, here it is on the ballot.
Right.
Then you'd have to admit that you're beholden to the citizens.
That's a point too.
That could be hard, and it takes a ton of work to get that done. Christy Parr says when you only hear from your rep with a door knock every 4 years, that's your sign. That's another good point.
That is a good point.
Yes.
Well, maybe we'll have to start going around trying to get some town halls going for some state reps.
Hey, you know what? Let's do it. All right. We have another topic. Let's jump to, do we want to go and give our shout out, or do we want to move to national stuff? Seems like it'd be a good time to do a shout out, right?
I think real briefly, we'll kind of do this real quick.
Real quick. So we're giving a shout out to one of our subscribers today.
Top supporter.
Be nice.
They're a great supporter.
Yeah,
they are.
So basically, what we're talking about is there's some stuff that was aired yesterday on a special that Beck is doing, Dunseith Declassified, and there was some clips that were taken, and they've used our clips throughout, which is fine.
100%.
And not in every episode. I'm not trying to overinflate anything. This is nothing along those lines. We did a lot of work on the Dunseith debacle. Just interviewing Hofer, and went up there to the site, went through a lot of documentation with him, did a lot of stuff there. And so there was a couple of shout outs, clips that they took from those establishing bases throughout. So, unofficial research team over here, right? But in this last episode, they went and they took 2 clips, and basically the series is called Dunseith Declassified. So far, the story has revolved around Jenny Babcock, who was a victim in a shooting in Minot. And we don't know what's going on, and we have said we don't know what's going on with that, but there's a lot of weird details around that whole situation. 100%. Brayo, the guy that allegedly shot Nick Van Pelt, it had a small but important connection to Dunseith. So there was this connection there. And so it felt like at the beginning of the story that they were going to go and connect in how this, and that didn't happen. And what it's turned into is Jenny telling her story of what happened that night on Christmas Eve, which is
it's a great story.
It's a very important story.
It is, because there are a ton of questions about the Braho incident and the case itself and some of the charges that have been changed around.
Right.
Not denying that. That is a fact.
So recently, as this has been well documented, the Minot Police Department has had some issues over the last couple years, and in the last few months they have skyrocketed. But they have maybe not all, but for the most part, the ones that we know about have been resolved. and there is a new direction that has come in, and it's going to continue to go on this new direction, whatever that might be. And so they went, and there was a episode where they talked about some of the officers that took their own lives, and how this was weird, and how this could affect this murder situation, and also potentially Dunseith. Like there could be this triangle of connection here. Mm-hmm. And we're like, and on a podcast, I said, no, that you're just hitting on the police department, trying to draw them into another story. And so there's a couple clips. And so I wanted to clarify, there's another one where we did an interview. It's a great interview with Chief, or Interim Chief Captain Dale Plessis. We're unofficial research team. He wasn't captain.
It's a 45-minute long interview. It's a fantastic interview. You guys touch on a ton of topics around town.
Unofficial research team over here. He was not the chief when Brejo did this act. He was not. Things have moved on. He is the interim chief now, trying to set a new direction. He said that crime is low in Minot, and we're going to talk about that topic, whether or not it is. So just generally wanted to say this. It is if they called this series a Minot murder mystery, it would have been way more adeptly named than Dunseith to classify to this point. Yeah. There may be a connection.
Not saying there won't be. But
when you hear interviews that are done on their end about it, they go and they don't talk about Dunseith much. They try to focus on Jenny Babcock's story, and it's a great story.
It is.
It's something that needs to be told. I'm glad someone's telling it. We considered doing it.
You were in talks with her at one point?
Yeah, we had conversations about it, and it just did not work out on our end, and I'm glad someone did it. That's a wonderful thing.
It's a great interview, and it's a good story.
Let's just tell it what it is, rather than
why are we dragging it out so long? Like if there is a legitimate connection that implicates the Minot Police Department with nefarious activities that are going on in Dunseith, North Dakota, it's something that should come out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
What are we waiting for? Because we've criticized Minot Police Department in the past, but we're the ones that live here. We want Minot Police Department to be good. We want it to be great.
Right.
We want to support those people. But if you have legitimate proof that shows they're doing nefarious things, let it out.
Yeah. Right.
Let's go. This is the time to do it. Yeah. Minot is in transition.
Right. Yeah. Let's get those things resolved and let's move on. So it is what it is. I'm going to choose to be nice. There's some other things I could say, but I'm going to choose to be nice, and we'll just kind of move on.
It is what it is.
But let's talk about this. Crime, Minot, terrible. I mean, it seems like every year there's something that happens where somebody gets drunk, something like along those lines, and a shooting happens. How bad? You have a background in this. We've already referenced it some. How bad is crime in Minot?
Statistically speaking, it's fairly low.
Okay.
Minot is an extremely safe city, and whether you like the Minot Police Department or not, whether you like Ward County Sheriff's Department or not, they're doing a fantastic job out there with the resources they have and the manning that they have trying to police the city. Organically, if you're looking at organic crime to Minot, it's low. You can go and find these numbers on state websites. You can find crime statistics and pull them down. Yeah. If you look at assaults per capita, we're on par with a lot of other cities because human beings are human beings.
For sure.
If you're looking at murders per capita, overall, it's high for the state of North Dakota, but most of those murders are connected to a very specific part of the crime world, and it's drug trafficking, and that is not organic to Minot. Right, and so it bothers me when people talk about how dangerous Minot is to live in. And I'm a guy that teaches personal defense, self-defense for a living. I was in the profession of violence for 30 years. And some would say still because, jiu-jitsu. It's like jiu-jitsu. But organically, the crime is not Minot. People born and raised here are not just going out and shooting each other for... By and large, it is brought into the city through drug trade. And so we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about crime organically to Minot, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just my opinion.
And I could be off, but I don't feel like there's a large robbery ring going on in Minot where people are getting mugged in the streets.
You need to be careful of your tools. Like for real, like your tools get stolen. Like
Fair.
there's some very specific things that happen.
Yeah.
But overall,
If you're talking about home invasions, super low. If you're talking about burglaries, I mean, over the year, it does. And crimes against person was, I think, somewhere around 600 cases last year. But that crimes against person is a really, really big umbrella term. That could be your car got broken into, your house got vandalized, you might have gotten something stolen off of you, or your tools got stolen from your shed. It's really, really big.
Yeah.
So it's still not overly. It's still not a statistic that makes me go, oh my gosh, Minot is such a terrible place to live. I need to move my kids and grandkids out of here. I'm perfectly fine living in this city with my kids and my grandkids. And
owning and operating a business.
I own and operate a business. And we've had crime against the business, crimes against property twice.
Yeah.
In the 8 years that we've been
that's crazy
open, but we also are on a part of Minot that is notorious for having a
lot of interesting foot traffic.
Yeah. Yep. Some of the most responded to addresses in Minot. So
very interesting. Very interesting with this whole thing. So
it's just blown out of proportion.
It is. Yeah. It is. Crime. Ultimately, we're probably fairly safe here in Minot. Okay. So where are we going next, Skylar?
Do you want to talk about the mayoral transition briefly? About some of the next possible steps. You wrote an article on it. You did a great job. It was
basically it comes down to this: like, are we going to appoint somebody, or are we the people going to do a special election by getting enough signatures? Various numbers have been reported on that. It seems like that changes every day, and everyone says that they talk to the PIO or POI,
anywhere from like 130 to like 450.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. Nonetheless. A very reasonable and attainable amount of signatures. I don't know. I personally, so like we're moving out of fact here. I think it's a bad idea. And what's interesting is the people and someone made a good point, like people are wanting to vote on this, right? Because voting seems like the right thing to do. Yet the person that would be appointed mayor is someone that they would have voted for.
At one point, yeah.
We're going to go instead try to get somebody new potentially, or they may still come from the same city council.
See, that's the biggest thing to me is if you're circulating the petition, do you have someone that plans on running? Because I'm not saying, obviously.
No, it's a great point.
And someone might come up and step up to the plate and run.
Mike might,
Yeah, there you go, Mike. Do it for 10 months. But on top of that, you have people that are looking at the situation internally that could be speculative as an appointment. And now all of a sudden you have two people that are already on city council running. And now you have to fill. So now you're stuck with 6 people until that election is resolved. Right. Then you have to appoint or possibly do another special election to fill their vacated city council role. And now going on from that, you're just repeating the process again next summer in June.
Right. Yeah. And for the mayor, you're going to be repeating the process again in June. It makes most sense for me if we're going to do it.
I'd prefer to vote on the candidate, of course, but I mean, it just feels so monetarily unnecessary to have a special election for someone that'll serve for 10 months.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. I feel like we should just allow the council to do what they said their intention was, and I think it was a great job of them to display that. Everyone did fantastic on that.
Great, yeah. I think that was a phenomenal city council meeting. Everyone there did a great job. They all made some comments. I think everyone said great words and made great points.
Yep. Marie has a question of exactly what happened. We have an article on our website that links to the full report. Yes, there was a video that was sent on accident, according to the report. So
if you didn't know, Mayor Tom Ross has resigned.
Yeah, no, I think that part is, we don't want to spend a lot of time on that part of it, just kind of moving on to what happens next. So let's just appoint somebody from within. If we want to have a special election for something because we want to have a say, then let's go and let that be on the city council, replacing the role of whomever would be appointed.
Because at that point, in theory, they would be appointing just someone from the street, maybe an application process.
Yep.
And so that wouldn't be an elected official. I think that would make much more sense. I don't think it's necessarily the best thing to do, but it would make a lot more sense for the argument's sake to have a special election for the vacated city council seat.
Yep. Absolutely. So that's kind of what's going on there. Crazy. Did you know that mine would be this exciting?
Who knew when I moved here? Because I'm not originally from North Dakota. So who knew when I came here? Mine would be so exciting.
Yeah. And I said before, I mean, I never, or excitement. It's a weird way to define excitement as well. I mean, it's sad, everything that's gone on.
It's a relative term.
Yeah.
But going off of Minot a little bit, we'll continue covering this story, of course, in depth. We'll continue talking about it. But let's kind of move.
Wait.
Uh-oh, he's got one more.
Joel makes a good comment. Okay, the council wants to appoint as a career politician over 20 years. How do you really feel about term limits? And that's a great point. The you may be the people of Minot, you may be me, because I was advocating for it either way. That it is a good point. We see term limits only in effect at the state level, in the legislature and governor. And it is interesting how, well, even to this point, term limits passes and Hovind gets elected in the same election.
Yeah. That's true.
Hovind been governors from 2000.
Did 3 terms of governor and has now on his, third term as a senator.
Right, yeah. Same election, and they both almost got voted in at the same level, same rate, yeah. So there is a double standard that happens there, and I don't get it. I think people, I don't get it. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah,
but
I think city governments largely are applicable to that double standard, for better or for worse. You have bigger cities like Minot, Fargo, Bismarck that, you could probably justify having term limits on there. But say you have a place like, Granville or Velva or Sawyer, a tiny little place that you only have maybe a dozen people that are even remotely interested in doing something like that at any given time. So it just makes it a lot harder in some specific levels for government to be efficiently or even done, period, at that point.
Well, and again, you have the most direct voice at the city level if you choose to stay engaged. And if the city council appoints somebody to be interim and we vote for that vacant city council person, and you don't like that, you get another chance next year to make your voice heard, or you can choose to spend tax dollars that could be going someplace else, really important, on holding an election for somebody who's going to sit there for 10 months.
$10,000 to $20,000.
Yeah.
So
for a special election.
Yeah. It's
not a fan.
Nope.
It's out there. There are some petitions that are circulating, so I don't know where they're at specifically, but I know they're around, so you can definitely look for them. If we find out, we can probably.
Or you don't have to. Either way.
But they are out there, and they have.
What about these tariffs?
Days left. Yeah. Let's move on to that. Speaking of, some more large tariffs were just announced last night.
Yeah, I saw that.
Mike, you got a surface level comment before we dive in?
Wait. Before we dive in, okay? Gray Man Podcast, shout it out.
Actually, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So I'm the host of a podcast called The Gray Man, and we talk about world events and personal defense. We're going into our 7th season coming up. Next episode should be out in a week or two. If you want to get an old retired foreign service officer, counterintelligence guy's opinion on world events, then please take a look at us. We're on Facebook and all of your publishing podcast places, Apple,
Spotify, all the things.
Yeah. So I'd appreciate.
I say that because that brings context of why we're even going to. This is what you guys do.
Yes, literally what we do all the time.
This is your podcast. This is largely related to what you spent most of your career doing as well.
Yeah, I spent most of my career So once my first master's degree, when I went to grad school, I went for international security studies, which is basically economics and politics, but foreign economics and politics. And specifically, I was Europe, Western Europe. I did some Eastern European studies, but mostly Western European studies. And it's designed to take normally officers in the military and put them in embassies so they can work the strategic level. If you're an agent, it's to take you and put you overseas and work counterintelligence, counterterrorism at the strategic level. So we know how countries are interacting with each other and how our actions and operations affect them at the national level. So that's really what I bring to the Gray Man podcast when we talk about these issues.
That's huge. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
Of experience and basic knowledge.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys letting me shout it out.
Of course. Absolutely. So tariffs.
America. So obviously, tariffs are something that have been around for centuries.
Yeah,
and it's something that countries use to incentivize domestic production a lot of times.
Yes,
and there have been tariffs that you could argue are unfairly slapped on the U.S. across the board. We have the largest global economy.
Yep.
However, yesterday, we saw a very broad amount of retaliatory tariffs launched against not just like a couple countries, but this is a global kind of tariff that has been presented here.
Targeted tariffs make a difference for very specific things. Broad tariffs are in my opinion, an absolutely terrible idea, especially at the international level. In an economy that's so globally connected, we perhaps, again, just my 2 cents, could have gotten away with a lot of this stuff up until the 80s when we were the preeminent superpower in the world. And I'm going to get some flack for saying this, but we're not anymore, in my opinion. And so when you slap tariffs across the board like this, other countries like Canada are going to make economic and military pacts with Europe, the EU, which they're doing right now. And they're going to cut us out because they don't technically need us. And then they're going to go straight to China and they're going to trade. And they're going to go to the EU, and EU is trading with Africa for precious minerals and get them from them. And then you have Japan and Korea that are now looking at entering in with economic trade pact with China to cut us out completely. So
just the sheer threat of them doing that,
and that's just
completely, I mean, breathtaking might not be the right word, but trend setting.
Well,
it changes things.
It does, and it's not just a threat. Canada's looking at a goal of being out of buying American hardware in 5 years. The EU is doing the exact same thing. They're looking at getting out of using American hardware. They're leaving the J-35 project, which is, if you have not followed that debacle, the J-35 fighter,
that's a whole.
Oh my God, like hundreds of. It's insane how much money we have dumped into a piece of crap aircraft. So that we
the next generation.
Yeah. It is an absolute piece of crap, in my opinion. But they're looking at getting rid of all of that and being purely Europe, and they can do that because they've got Airbus that can build airplanes and equipment for them, and then Boeing and Lockheed Martin take a huge hit. And if you don't understand what defense contracts mean to the U.S. economy, you don't follow economics.
Right.
You can argue that maybe it shouldn't mean as much as it does.
I would argue that, absolutely.
But the fact is, it does mean this much.
It's huge. Yeah. It's huge for the U.S. economy and our gross domestic product. It is massive what we sell across the world. But now we have our largest partners for the longest amount of time post-World War II saying that they're going to just leave. And not only are they saying it, but they have the means to do it.
Right.
And because they say that, then we slap more retaliatory tariffs on them. In theory, it's supposed to bring production back to the U.S. What it does is crush the middle class, because we're going to feel that in the goods and services immediately.
Billionaires don't care about tariffs.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't even matter.
Is the bigger problem with this the economy that's going to be affected, or is it our global relations that's going to be affected? What's on the negative side? If it goes as bad as it could, what side's the more affected?
I think...
Yes.
Yes. The answer would be yes. Economically, it impacts us. Like I said, I don't think it impacts much outside the middle class, because those who invest heavily like a volatile market.
Okay. Right.
Which you can watch. That's, again, not my opinion. It's, you just look at investment history. It's very profitable. A volatile market's very profitable. Those can dump millions of dollars into the market. But strategically, if you're looking at strategically, it is a massive hit for us strategically. NATO is something that has been a shield for democracy in the Western Hemisphere and in Europe for a very long time. And the fact that we are punishing our NATO allies because they don't because the incumbent administration isn't getting what they want baffles me, because it wrecks us strategically. Isolationism, and you'll get a lot of people that will say, well, then we just need to focus on America. Let's pull all of our troops back. Let's focus on America. Sounds awesome in theory. It doesn't work in reality. Give me one point in history where isolationism has, at the end of it, really worked out for us.
Mm-hmm. It's a hard one to...
Yeah.
Especially full isolationism, too.
Yeah, which is what people are calling for, right?
Yeah. It would have been your first handful of years as America pre-War of 1812.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't hold our European allies accountable for their share of the defense budget in Europe, because
that's a different story.
Yeah, that's a different argument, right? And we should.
Mm-hmm. They should pay their share.
Absolutely, and they have underfunded it for a very long time. Yeah. And I saw that when I was working in Europe as an agent. Historically, they underfunded it, but I'm trying to think about how to say this. Sometimes I have to take a step back and in my brain.
No, it has to happen. You got to form the right conclusions at times. You don't want to just spew. I get. I'm notorious for that.
Yeah,
he just spews.
If my co-host on the Gray Mountain podcast was here, he would be telling me that the vein in my head is throbbing.
Starting to pop out a little
yeah,
I like it.
So, to me, it started back with reset diplomacy. This issue is not a current administration issue. Strategically, the tariffs are hurting us bad, but with reset diplomacy, where we decided that everything that Russia had done since World War II was not a big deal, and we were just going to forget it and we're going to be friends. Well, that emboldened Russia to then build up. And we talked about the Ukrainian invasion 6 months before it happened and called it on the Gray Man podcast. And Russia will always be Russia. Russia knows two things. Historically, Russia and China, they know two things. They know economic expansion or warfare, and when they don't have one, they will always have the other. Yeah. And if we don't fund the defense or help fund the defense and stand the wall in Europe, then Russia's going to have one of those two things. Mm-hmm. And our plan strategically for Europe is legitimately to let Russia have it right now. That's the plan right now, not to defend it. Because there's this natural. Sorry if this is getting boring. If I'm getting off topic,
you're good. You're good.
If a global World War III effectively were to start between the NATO and Russia, the plan is for just Russia to take mainland Europe.
Yeah, because we have nothing to defend. We have nothing to stop Russia from doing that. The Fulda Gap in Germany is a natural land formation that has valleys. That's the only place that a full army can get through with tanks and mechanized and get into the West. And historically, Russia has used it multiple times, and Napoleon used it, and armies have used it throughout history. Well, we don't have anything to guard that anymore. It's been gone since like 2012.
Fair.
We have absolutely nothing there.
There's some people.
Yeah, there's people. There's not armor like the 1st Armored Division, the 3rd Armored Division. We don't have that ability anymore. And in the Germans, great army. I've got to work with the Germans. Awesome. Their intelligence service, awesome. They don't have the ability to fully protect the Fulda Gap against the Russian army.
They've just announced some massive expansions to their military recently, too.
Yes, 100%. And their intelligence service has just announced some crazy stuff going on in Europe having to deal with Russia as well. But France doesn't have it. Spain doesn't have the ability. Germany doesn't have the ability to guard it. Mm-hmm. The Italians definitely do not have the ability to do it. Mm-hmm. But we do. Right. And what happens in Europe matters in the U.S. economically, at the strategic level, because they're
tied together.
If we saw it in 2008 with the market crash, when the market crashed in the U.S., what did the Euro market do?
Right. Yeah.
And what did the Nikkei do? Mm-hmm. So we are so globally connected that we can't ignore what's happening there. And by imposing these tariffs and legitimately forcing our allies, our historic allies like Canada and France and Germany, to go elsewhere and make economic agreements with each other, we may not feel it this year, but I promise you we're going to feel it next year. Because, again, defensive contracts are... The defense industry is the backbone of the U.S. economy, and it has been, because war is good money.
It is.
It's fantastic money.
They make that. It's a booming business.
A question that is in the comments is basically what's the purpose of NATO? Of course, it was formed in 1949. Yep. Collective Defense Alliance in response to growing tensions in post-World War II Europe. As you have seen NATO and worked NATO
NATO
and have worked with it, has it been productive? Is it a good thing? The form of it looks like it's probably going to change in the next 10 years or less. Is it good, bad, and different?
Overall, I think NATO is a good thing. There was a while that I wasn't a big fan of NATO, but overall, it is a very good alliance that we need to have, and we need to have our NATO partners pay their fair share. I've got no qualms with that. Yeah. I wasn't a fan that Turkey was when Turkey was admitted to NATO. That made no sense to me because they're not on the Atlantic. But NATO
North Atlantic Treaty.
But we're also expanding it. Hungary's part of NATO, so.
It's well past
past
original line that we said we wouldn't. I mean, same with Poland.
Yeah,
we originally said we would never go to Poland.
100%. So
it's so risky adding people to it.
It's very risky because when it was formed, we and I'm zero fan of Russia, by the way. When I went through boot camp, we were shooting baffle pop-up targets with a hammer and sickle on their helmet. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I'm an old school.
Exactly.
I'm an old school. Russia will always be the enemy kind of guy.
Yep.
Whatever coat they try to wear, but we told them that we weren't going to move past a certain point, and we have. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that justifies the invasion of the Ukraine because it absolutely does not. But NATO serves a very, very good purpose of holding the line for democracy if you believe in the democratic process. Because if you don't, then it doesn't serve any purpose. Mm-hmm. And they absolutely came to our aid in 9/11. Mm-hmm. We did the majority of the heavy lifting in the beginning. But when I've done 4 tours in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan as an agent, and I will tell you
that was built and sent to Afghanistan was on the level of the first Gulf War.
Yeah, absolutely right. And
Iraq's a different story, but
it's a whole nother ammo. We can have a whole nother discussion about that. But our NATO allies did and continue to the very end do a lot of heavy lifting in Afghanistan and help us prosecute that war in a variety of different aspects of it. We invoked Article 5 of the NATO Charter, and they came to the rescue. It, So it is a valid alliance in my opinion, and it helps keep those strategic ties that keep us in a friendship with countries that allow information sharing at a level that keeps the U.S. safe, because or we have organic threats in the U.S.
Right.
We have
it's a thing.
However, we need our allies to feed us information as well, because we don't have enough people on the ground collecting them. Mm-hmm. I worked with some fantastic intelligence agencies all over Europe, and they do a great job. And that's going to stop.
Right.
And that's going to hurt us. It makes us less safe as a country. Yeah. You can talk about being isolationist and bringing the army back here, but the threats will still be there. And at the international level, you have got to have those ties. You have to have those ties.
It's such a different world now too, because you know everything that happens in Beijing the second it happens.
Yep.
There's not a delay. There's not having to wait till the news. It can be tweeted out or it can be posted instantaneously, and you know what's going on. It leads to a
post on Signal, whatever it takes.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
You weren't a fan of what happened on Signal?
I'm not a fan at all in any way, shape, or form. There's when talking about intelligence, there are certain tradecraft things that are staples of how business is done. There are staples of how information at that level should be talked about, and using a messaging app,
third party
messaging app that the Department of Defense 2 weeks prior had published a report that went up the chain of command to the Secretary of Defense saying that it was a compromised app.
Fair. So regardless of anything, in short, regardless of the conversations that were had in such app, it shouldn't have even been used.
It shouldn't have been used to begin with. But the other problem is that the information that was in there, if one of my field agents would have come to me, because I have been a publication authority in my career, and I've been a classification authority in my career for information. The information in that conversation, had they brought it to me, would have been classified at least secret had we put it in an intelligence report.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I want to end on this question.
yeah.
Okay. This is a good question. It may not. It's a terrible question. Maybe it's a good question. We'll find out. Why can't we just be allies with Russia?
Because our views of the way the world should work are absolutely on opposite sides of the spectrum.
Right.
Okay. One of the things when
It's
I
a
was
long answer.
Yeah,
It's got to be. No, it's a big question.
it's a long answer. So if you look at a Russian history, Russians operate best under a form of government that is fairly authoritarian throughout its history. And go all the way back.
You can argue if it's best for the people or not, but that's
that's how they operate.
Question,
yeah. We do not, and if we don't, that makes us on the opposite spectrum. A democracy is on the opposite spectrum of authoritarianism, and that causes us to clash consistently. And we've been doing it for a long time. We've been fighting proxy wars with Russia around the world for 70 years.
Yeah.
So. We just look at the way we govern people differently, and therefore
That's enough.
Yeah.
they will always be at odds with us.
There's that just.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Great conversation. We covered a little bit of everything today.
We did.
Got
Thank
some
you,
state
Mike.
stuff, got some local stuff to Minot, and got some national stuff. Really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you very much.
Look forward to doing it again sometime.
I look forward to being back.
Yeah, I really enjoyed some of the perspectives on that. I don't care where you stand on it, just perspectives on the human trafficking, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get big topics thrown and
They're sensational headlines.
well, they are that, but you don't. You also want to understand it, unpack it a little bit, and really understand what the impact truly is.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting. So, great conversation. Glad you're on. Good to see you again, Kyler.
Always, Jonathan.
Yeah, we'll see. Kyler, we'll see you tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. on the Daily Brief. Be sure to be subscribed to the channel so that way you can catch that tomorrow morning. All the local headlines delivered right on YouTube in your inbox or at mydakotan.com. Thanks for watching this episode of Indie Talk. We'll be back on Tuesday, 9 a.m. It's the new norm. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.